When the first light of dawn crept over the jagged peaks of White Mountain Valley, Ayani knelt beside a curious stone, her breath coming in shallow gasps, unaware that her simple act of curiosity would soon ignite a storm that threatened both her people and the greedy settlers of the territory. The stone was unlike anything she had ever seen, carved with intricate markings that traced lines of rivers, mountains, and hidden valleys, each symbol telling a story older than any living settler could comprehend. But to the men hunting for fortune, it was nothing less than a key to unimaginable wealth. Dust from gold clung stubbornly to her fingers, a cruel twist of fate that marked her as guilty in the eyes of those who would rather see a native woman punished than question their own assumptions. Ayani's horse lay motionless nearby, an arrow buried in its flank, and the morning air was thick with the scent of smoke and iron. She had been running since before dawn, her path carved through the rugged terrain of her ancestors' lands, pursued by men who had no regard for life beyond their own greed. Among them was Vernon Briggs, a man whose wealth and arrogance made him fearless in the face of law and conscience alike. He had ridden to the valley with 12 armed men, each eager to claim whatever treasure the woman might carry, convinced that she had stolen gold from a prospector, long missing a man named Dutch Williams. To them, justice was a tool wielded not to protect the innocent, but to seize what they believed was rightfully theirs. Ayani's dress, traditional and worn, was torn from the struggle. Her dark hair clung to her sweat-streaked face, and her eyes darted between the advancing mob and the stone that she held like a shield. Every step she had taken was a gamble, each breath a defiance of fate. She did not flee out of cowardice, but because she understood the stakes. The stone was sacred, a map, not to gold, but to the burial grounds of her ancestors. To touch it carelessly, or let it fall into the wrong hands, would be to desecrate centuries of memory, to sever the fragile thread that connected her people to their past. The settlers' shouts echoed across the valley, loud and accusing. "Hand it over," one screamed. "We know you took it," another yelled, brandishing a rifle with hands unshaken by conscience. Ayani's heart pounded not from fear of death alone, but from the knowledge that if she surrendered, the truth would be buried alongside her ancestors' bones, and the mob's misjudgment would stain her people's honor. The valley, so familiar to her now, felt like a cage. Every ridge and boulder a potential witness to injustice, every shadow a threat. For the audience, the tension was immediate and palpable. Here was a woman alone, outnumbered and misunderstood, holding not a treasure for personal gain, but a sacred trust passed down through generations. The narrative spoke to more than suspense. It spoke to the enduring struggle to protect what is precious, the courage required to stand for truth in the face of overwhelming opposition. In that moment, Ayani embodied both the vulnerability and resilience of those whose heritage and culture have been tested by centuries of misunderstanding and greed. Even as the light of morning illuminated the valley painting, it gold with the deceptive beauty of the sun, the story drew the audience into a moral question, as ancient as the land itself: who has the right to claim what is sacred, and who will risk everything to defend it? For viewers over 45, particularly in America, this was more than an adventure. It was a meditation on responsibility, on the weight of history, and on the quiet courage it takes to protect a legacy that others may not see but which must endure nonetheless. Ayani clutched the stone tighter, sensing the approach of inevitable conflict. The dawn had come, but with it arrived a trial not just of strength or survival, but of principle. And in those first heartbeat moments of the day, as the wind rustled through the pines and the shadows of the mountains stretched long across the valley floor, one truth was clear. This morning would not end with the stone untouched, nor with her people's honor untested. The 12 armed men of Vernon Briggs closed in their boots, crunching against the rocky ground, rifles leveled, eyes cold with greed. Ayani stood her ground, the sacred stone clutched tightly to her chest, every fiber of her being vibrating with fear and defiance. Vernon himself rode forward, a cruel smile tugging at his lips. "Hand it over, girl," he barked. "That stone, that gold dust on your fingers, it all belongs to us. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Ayani's heart pounded, but she did not flinch. The truth of the stone, the story it carried, etched in lines and symbols older than the hills around them, was far too precious to surrender. She could feel the weight of her ancestors in her hands, a responsibility that far outweighed her own safety. To give in now would be to betray not only her people, but the generations that had entrusted this knowledge to her. From the ridge above, a solitary figure appeared, Malachi Crow, a middle-aged rancher who had spent his life scraping by on a struggling homestead, watching as wealthier men abused the powerless. He had seen injustice countless times, and now seeing the peril Ayani faced, something inside him snapped. Despite knowing that standing here might cost him his life, his land, even the cattle he could barely feed, he dismounted and stepped between Ayani and Vernon's men. "This is my land," Malachi said, voice steady though his hand hovered near his rifle. "And no one is taking anyone down here while I'm standing." The settlers laughed at him, a cruel, dismissive sound, but Ayani felt a flicker of hope. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, a single man's courage could make a difference. Vernon's patience snapped. He raised his rifle, signaling his men to prepare for violence. The ground beneath them seemed to tremble as tension coiled like a spring. Ayani, sensing the rising danger, stepped forward, speaking with a voice that cut across the chaos. She explained the stone's true significance. It was not a treasure map, but a sacred record of burial sites of her people, a map of memory and reverence that held spiritual power and historical weight. To touch it lightly, to seize it in greed, would invite misfortune and desecration. The men laughed, some nervously, some with scorn, but their certainty faltered slightly at her words. Meanwhile, dust swirled from the eastern ridge, a cloud of motion heralding the approach of Apache warriors who had been tracking Ayani. Malachi's eyes narrowed as he considered the odds, 12 armed men against himself and a young woman with a group of reinforcements approaching from a distance, whose allegiance he could not yet be certain of. Even in this maelstrom, Ayani stood unwavering, a living testament to courage under pressure. She did not cower. She reasoned, she warned, she held the line for something far greater than herself. And Malachi, watching her, felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him. This was more than defending a stranger. It was an act of justice, a refusal to let greed and prejudice dictate the outcome. The air felt electric, thick with anticipation. Each heartbeat stretched longer than the last as the distant hoofbeats grew louder, the coming clash imminent. Yet despite the fear, despite the odds, there was clarity in purpose. Ayani's bravery had ignited Malachi's own resolve, and together they formed a fragile barrier against those who sought to destroy or plunder. In that moment, the valley seemed suspended in time, a crucible in which courage, honor, and human decency would be tested. For the audience, the scene was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Here was a woman confronting the full weight of colonial greed, standing for her people, her history, and her values. And beside her, a man of conscience, making a choice that could cost him everything, yet affirming that moral courage is sometimes the most powerful weapon of all. The dust from the east continued to rise, signaling help, yet the decision was theirs alone: fight for principle or surrender to fear and greed. After the tense standoff in the valley, Malachi and Ayani found themselves facing a new, even more precarious challenge. Vernon Briggs and his band of settlers were far from giving up. Their thirst for the stone and the imagined treasure it represented had only intensified. At the same time, Ayani's own people were moving through the rugged landscape, searching for her, unaware that she was accompanied by a white man. To them, Malachi could easily appear as a kidnapper, a threat to their sacred trust. The narrow canyon ahead offered both refuge and peril, a hidden place her ancestors had once used to evade soldiers and intruders during the harsh years of westward expansion. Ayani led the way, her steps sure and deliberate despite the exhaustion etched into her frame. She explained the stone's true meaning, each word carrying the weight of generations. The markings were not a treasure map to gold, but a sacred record of the burial sites of her ancestors, a chronicle of lives long past. Every line, every symbol had been etched to preserve memory and honor not profit. For the first time, Malachi fully grasped why she had risked everything to protect it, and why the misunderstanding by Vernon and the settlers was so dangerous, not just for her, but for the legacy of her people. Their path through the canyon was treacherous. Sharp rocks tore at their clothing, hidden gullies threatened to twist ankles, and the narrow passages forced them to move slowly each step, a balance between haste and caution. Behind them, the sound of approaching hooves reminded them that the settlers were relentless, unwilling to be thwarted by terrain or conscience. Ahead, the faint rustle of movement hinted that Ayani's warriors were near, but until identities were clear, Malachi could not risk showing himself. As they moved deeper into the canyon, the social stakes became apparent. Vernon had convinced local authorities that Ayani's people had killed Dutch Williams over a stash of gold, framing the entire Apache community as violent thieves. By association, Malachi had been painted as complicit, a white man who aided and abetted the crime. The weight of this accusation pressed down on him as heavily as the canyon walls, yet he knew retreat was not an option. Turning Ayani over would violate every principle he held dear. Every bend in the canyon brought new tension. Shadows could conceal either friend or foe, and the echo of distant voices made it impossible to tell who was closing in. Yet amidst the danger, there was a rhythm to their escape, a careful dance between exposure and cover, intelligence and instinct. Ayani's knowledge of the land guided their path, while Malachi's presence provided both protection and reassurance. The canyon became a crucible in which courage and intellect were tested, each decision a potential turning point between survival and disaster. Malachi began to see the broader picture. The settlers' greed was not the only threat. Misunderstanding and fear could be just as deadly. He had to navigate not just the physical landscape, but the fragile social terrain as well, earning the trust of Ayani's people, while keeping her safe from those who would see her harmed. The stakes were personal and cultural. Failure could ignite conflict, destroy trust, and leave both sides vulnerable to tragedy. For the audience, the tension was nearly unbearable. Here were two people bound by courage and principle, threading a path between two powerful forces, neither of which could be fully trusted. Each step was laden with suspense, each decision a test of wit, courage, and moral clarity. Viewers could feel the urgency, the danger, and the intelligence at work, understanding that heroism often meant making split-second choices, with centuries of history hanging in the balance. The canyon, once a place of sanctuary, had become a stage for a story of survival honor and the delicate art of protecting what is sacred. As the first light of day stretched across the valley, tension hung thick in the air. Vernon Briggs and his men had surrounded the Apache village rifles, trained faces hardened by greed and arrogance. Yet within the village, Chief Mukun and Joseph Crowfeather were calm. Their eyes steadied their strategy far beyond what Vernon anticipated. They had chosen a path that few would have expected, not confrontation, not bloodshed, but a demonstration of truth and honor that would challenge assumptions and redefine power. Malachi, standing beside Ayani, felt the weight of the morning pressing on him. Every step, every glance carried consequence. The villagers had gathered not in hidden positions or behind barricades, but openly in the central plaza. Women and children moved among the elders, their presence a statement in itself, strength in transparency, courage in vulnerability. Malachi could sense the growing unease among Vernon's men. This was not the scene of an ambush, yet the air was thick with authority and moral weight. Chief Mukun stepped forward, hands raised, empty and visible. "I am Chief Mukun," he called out, his voice clear and commanding across the distance. "I speak for my people. We will not surrender anyone to mob justice." The calm certainty in his tone sent a ripple through the ranks of settlers, and even the military contingent hesitated uneasy at the presence of a leader who wielded authority without violence. Joseph Crow Feather moved beside the chief, carrying with him the weight of 30 years spent as a scout and a surveyor. I witnessed the events surrounding Dutch Williams's death. He declared, his voice measured and unflinching. The Apache people had no part in it. The man who killed Williams was Samuel Garrett, a prospector who owed Williams debts and sought to cover his actions with lies. Here is the proof. Bundles were unwrapped, revealing Williams' personal effects, his silver pocket watch leather journal, and the tools of his trade. Every item bore witness to the truth, confirming Joseph's testimony. Murmurs ran through the crowd as the settlers and soldiers processed the revelation. Vernon's face paled his certainty, dissolving in the face of incontrovertible evidence. His accusations built on fear and prejudice were crumbling, but Chief Mukun did not stop there. With deliberate calm, he revealed that the Apache had knowledge of 3 major gold deposits in the territory untouched for generations, because the wealth of the earth held no sacred value to them. "We understand its importance to others," the chief said. "We propose a partnership, legal recognition of our lands, protection for our people, and a fair share of the profits in exchange for the knowledge and guidance of these deposits." The proposition hung in the air, a tangible, unprecedented solution. Wealth, justice, and mutual respect bundled together. The settlers' initial shock gave way to excitement. The possibility of guaranteed riches shifted their focus from vengeance to negotiation. Vernon, desperate to maintain control, raised his rifle one final time, but the moment passed. Captain Morton and his soldiers intervened, restraining him before he could act. The power dynamics had flipped. Logic and integrity had outmaneuvered greed and intimidation. For Malachi, the morning's events were transformative. His courage to stand by Ayani to protect her in the valley the previous day had earned him the trust of the tribe. Chief Mukun formally invited him to serve as the official liaison between the Apache Council and the territorial authorities. His role would not only ensure fair management of the mines, but also build a bridge between communities long divided by mistrust. Ayani, her eyes bright with relief and pride, smiled quietly. The alliance she had risked everything to protect was now tangible, strengthened by integrity and courage. Samuel Garrett was found hiding in the abandoned mine shaft, confronted with the evidence and the eyes of those he had wronged. He confessed, and justice was served according to both tribal and territorial law. Vernon Briggs, stripped of authority and arrested, would face the consequences of his greed and deception. The settlers, once poised for violence, were left to witness the power of truth and strategy. The audience, watching from the imagined perspective of the valley, could not help but feel a swell of satisfaction and admiration. The Apache had turned the expectations of their adversaries upside down. No shots had been fired, yet victory was complete justice, upheld cultural heritage preserved, and a framework for future cooperation established. Malachi's bravery, combined with the wisdom of Chief Mukun and Joseph Crow Feather, had created an outcome that transcended conflict, a triumph of intellect, morality, and diplomacy over brute force. This was not just a story of survival, it was a story of strategy, honor, and the profound impact of standing for what is right. For viewers, especially those who remembered or cherished the lessons of integrity, courage, and community, the narrative offered both tension and resolution, a reminder that the right course of action, though difficult, could yield far greater rewards than mere confrontation ever could. In the weeks and months that followed, Malachi Crow and Ayani worked side by side with the Apache Council to manage the newfound gold deposits, establishing a partnership that brought prosperity not only to the tribe but also to the surrounding settlers. What had begun as a desperate struggle to protect a sacred stone evolved into a model of cooperation, respect, and shared responsibility. The mines, once a source of potential conflict, became symbols of trust and mutual benefit, proving that when courage and integrity guide decisions, even the most contentious situations can yield positive outcomes. Malachi, once a struggling rancher, barely able to keep his cattle fed, now found himself acting as the official liaison between the Apache Council and territorial authorities. His role demanded not just practical skill, but steadfast honesty and a deep respect for both cultures. Ayani, ever wise and perceptive, became his closest advisor, guiding him in understanding the spiritual and cultural significance of the land and its resources. Together, they forged policies that honored the Apache heritage while enabling safe and fair mining operations for all parties. The story of their alliance carried lessons that extended far beyond the boundaries of White Mountain Valley. First, it underscored the power of courage and righteousness. Malachi's decision to stand for what was just despite overwhelming personal risk had reshaped the fates of many. Courage, it became clear, was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act rightly in spite of it. Ayani's unwavering dedication to her people's heritage exemplified the strength required to protect what is sacred, a reminder that true honor often demands sacrifice. Second, the narrative highlighted the importance of cultural respect and the recognition of heritage. Vernon Briggs' failure stemmed from his inability to see beyond greed. He ignored the profound value of the stone not as gold, but as a link to a people's past. By contrast, Malachi and the Apache demonstrated that understanding and valuing different perspectives can prevent needless conflict and lay the foundation for enduring partnerships. For viewers, particularly men over 45, this reinforced the idea that integrity and respect in one's decisions, whether in business, community, or family, can have lasting consequences. Third, the resolution emphasized collaboration over confrontation. The outcome proved that thoughtful negotiation and transparency can achieve far more than force or intimidation. By choosing dialogue and sharing knowledge rather than engaging in violence, the Apache and Malachi turned a potentially bloody confrontation into a mutually beneficial arrangement. The lesson is clear: patient strategy and moral clarity often yield results far greater than short-term aggression. Finally, the story illustrated that doing what is right may come at personal cost, but the long-term rewards, trust, respect, and genuine partnership are invaluable. Malachi lost the comfort of anonymity and the quiet predictability of his ranch life, yet he gained a legacy influence and the profound satisfaction of having made a difference. Ayani and her people preserved their cultural heritage and ensured the safety and prosperity of their community. Together, they proved that ethical action can transcend fear and greed, shaping futures in ways that mere survival cannot. As the sun set over the valley painting the horizon with gold and crimson, the narrative drew to its close, leaving a powerful reminder for all who listened. Courage, integrity, and respect for heritage are timeless virtues, and acting on them can change the world around us. If the story of Ayani, Malachi, and the Apache tribe inspired you, please follow Epic Western Stories, share, like, and leave a comment below to explore more tales from the frontier where bravery and honor shape destinies in unexpected ways. Thank you for joining us on this journey.